So my name's Nick. My wife and I, Danica, bought this building almost 2 years ago now, and have gone on a really incredible journey of redeveloping it and also reimagining it in a way that we thought would be beneficial for more of a public use, and also be able to present this building's incredible, remarkable history of dairy for not only the local, history, but in many ways, this building is a reflection of a regional and national story, not only as it relates to state's dairy history, but as it relates to kind of our relationship nationally with dairy and dairy farmers. And so that's kind of where we're coming from. I was going to do a walking tour, and now I'm kind of like, maybe we should just kind of run through this here really quickly, and then we'll have plenty of opportunities to walk more like individually and on your own instead of with me, so that we don't crowd each other out. But I do want to, if you didn't grab one of these are 3 documents that I have in my own personal files of this building that haven't appeared anywhere yet. So I feel like, now you've got a little cool element that only you and the other 50 at 3 o'clock and the other 50 at 1 o'clock. Anyway, these are unique to your experience. They're not up on any of our walls, but they were pretty foundational in helping us understand the story of this building. So I kind of think how this will go is I'll talk for about 30 minutes here and tell you a little bit about the history of this building and what we know about the history of this building, and I'll help you guys narrate those 3 historical documents that you saw your family's name in there, right?
No, I saw this one.
Oh, you did tell me about it. Mary did. So we'll talk a little bit about those documents, and then I would say then you will be off to feel free to explore the building based on what I've said. So I'm a historian at heart. I have an undergraduate degree in history from the University of Wisconsin. I have a graduate degree in history from the University of Wisconsin. The first part of my career, I spent teaching history at University of Wisconsin Superior. That was my first job ever, more than 20 years ago. And then at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, and I ended up finding my way into business, and did business for about 15 years, and kind of was part of that mass exodus of retiring people in 2020, when everybody was like, screw work, or whatever we did at that time. And I thought I was going to be retired for a really long time, like forever. And but my wife and I and our kids have always loved Paoli. We just live in Middleton, Madison border. And we were out here a couple of years ago, and just thought about, well, maybe what do we want to do with our second half of our lives, and loved Paoli's history, loved the river, loved the mill, and I have a couple friends who run businesses here. Susan Troller, who owns the Cluck store and owns the Mercantile, which was the old Hefty Garage, and friends that own the creamery here, Landmark, and have connections to the community. And so about 2 years ago, we stumbled upon just this conversation over a couple beers at the mill, and said, well, maybe we want to do, one of these old buildings might be for sale, we could fix it up. I want to run a pizza place. And so we were like, well, I called Susan Troller, and I said, is there anything for sale? She walked me over to this building, and we started looking at this building, and I mean, people knew it, I think, locally as the Paoli Creamery, but wasn't entirely it wasn't a well-known thing. I mean, it was a kind of a couple of different shops at the time. Obviously, Artisan Gallery before that, which is pretty well-known. Almost everything kind of behind here had been mostly closed off to the public since the 1980s. And we started looking at it mostly like Mitch had redeveloped it. I wanted to make a pizza place is kind of the story. And we have we had this building has a easement with the farm family next door. Some of you guys know them, Laura and Phil Roethlisberger. And I didn't know either of them at the time, and I needed to know if I was going to buy this building and do something with it. We needed to know a little bit about the easement, right, which goes along this property. And so I called the Roethlisbergers, who are our neighbors, and I called. Laura picked up the phone, and Laura was like, "Well, yeah, you need to talk to my husband. Like, looking at this building, you guys have this easement. You need to talk to my husband, Phil." And Phil got on the phone. Great.
That's Phil's
Yeah, that was Phil. Thanks, Phil. Good to hear from you. Phil got on the phone, and for the next over an hour, talked to me first about the easement very quickly, but then talked to me about his life as a dairy farmer and growing up in a dairy farm family in Verona and Montrose, and all of the connections that his family had as members of the cooperative of dairy farmers that ran this building until 1955, and also his work as a dairy farmer and delivering milk here when it was owned by Pabst from 1955 to 1980. And I got off the phone and I told Danica, I was like, wow, that was a really cool story. We was like, ooh, this building, I mean, my history hat kind of went on, and I was like, oh, this building is pretty neat. And I started, exploring a few more things about the building and its history. I had a great opportunity to talk to a couple of, the Eichelkraut family and the Sarbacher family. They both delivered milk here. And this was all still while we were doing due diligence on the history of this building. And I got a call from the previous owners of this building, Eileen Berkeley, who really helped facilitate this process. And she said, "Did you hear the news?" It was a year and a half, last June of 2021. I said, "No, I hadn't heard the news." She's like, "Phil passed away." And for a guy that really didn't know Phil Roethlisberger very well and had a couple conversations with him, that was a pretty profound moment, because it made me realize all sorts of things about, it helped me clarify my thoughts about kind of this generation of dairy farmers that was here and built these communities, and this really golden age of Wisconsin dairy when there were, tens of thousands of dairy farmers just in this immediate region, delivering to thousands of dairy factories just in this immediate region. And the more we got to think about that, and the more we got to know the history of this building, the more we were inspired to, one, go through the crazy process of buying it, which was in itself like something much more significant than what either Danica or I wanted to do in retirement. And two, really rebuild this building and restore this building in a way that not only honored the work of people like Phil and the thousands of dairy farmers that over the course of 100 years delivered to this factory, but also to create a series of businesses that we would be sure would be able to honor the stories of people like him and ensure that this building became an opportunity to hand off a living collective history to the people of the future, for people to come and enjoy forever, beyond just the work that me and my wife did, beyond the work that the contractors did, but really to rethink this building in a way that could be modern, that could be a profitable business, which is a really important part of this whole thing, but that ensured that this building really became a monument and a piece of living history to this incredible, remarkable era of Wisconsin dairy between about 1900 and 1960, which was the height of this building's importance to the community, that this building could then be symbolic of, and could be symbolic not only for the hundreds of local people who worked here or farmers that delivered milk here, but for all these tourists who are like drawn to this region. It's Wisconsin, we love cheese, love dairy, we're America's dairyland, but to be able to provide some insight into this moment when we really became Wisconsin's and America's dairyland, right here in this region. And that became a much bigger process of working to do what we saw to preserve the building and to preserve it in perpetuity for the use and enjoyment of the public, and also to kind of reimagine it so that it could be a successful business, right? And not just a successful business that preserved the building, but also more importantly preserved the stories of the people who delivered milk here and the people that worked here. So really that became almost a year of research in not only helping to kind of collect the stories from dozens of different dairy farmers who we talked to and dozens of different workers that we talked to, but also recording and documenting and narrating those stories so that we could get this building on the National Register of Historic Places and get this building on the State Register of Historic Places as an exemplary example of mid-20th century Wisconsin dairy, which we were able to do.
Woo! Sorry. That just kind of snuck out there, Nick.
Well, and to me that's kind of cool because you think about the tens of thousands of dairy farmers that there were, and we're down to 6,000, right? And you think of the thousands of dairy plants that there were in the state, and we're down to 100. And we're likely, if current trends continue, we're going to have 1,000 dairy farmers delivering to 50 factories by 2050. Think of that, and think about the change that reflects when you think of 1950, where you had 60,000 dairy farmers delivering to 2,500 factories. And think about what that building and what this building will mean to the future when we are in a place where there's 1,000 dairy farmers delivering to 50 factories. And that we have the opportunity to create this place and secure this building in its time, modernize it, and ensure that this building is here to tell those stories of this golden age of Wisconsin dairy. So what we learned that was not immediately apparent when we first looked at this building is that it was originally established right there. One of the earliest picture we have is right there, by 7 farm families who formed a cooperative in 1888, and that cooperative's name was the Paoli Cheese Factory Association. And those 7 farm families started making cheese right on this site for what we think to be a couple years. And then something happened, it dissolved, and in 1895, that Paoli Cheese Factory Association became the Paoli Cooperative Creamery Association. And in 1895, they started producing butter on the site. We think in the same building, we're not entirely sure. But from 1895 through the 1930s, as we found out, this really was one of the most important sites of butter production in the state. We know for a fact that we had one of Wisconsin's most important and celebrated butter makers in Louis Bolstead, who you see there. We know that he not only won the best butter in the state in 1913 and 1917, of which he won a clock and a chair for both of those things. But more importantly, we find out that this guy was working with UW, and he was going all across the state, working with these smaller startup creameries and these smaller co-ops that were kind of transitioning butter from the home to factories and getting them to adopt wholesome, sanitary methods, new ideas of industry. And this guy was working right here for almost a decade and producing the state's best butter. And we found that out, and we soon found out through a letter that I received from the previous owner of this building, that in 1932, this factory was really struggling as a butter factory. And Obviously, everybody was struggling in 1932. And the directors of the co-op hired a recent Swiss immigrant named Otto Tallman, who came into this factory to build a Swiss cheese program. So that I think that at the time the cooperative was only like 15 farmers, but to ensure that depending on the market out there for their milk, this co-op could make either cheese or butter, depending on whether it was advantageous for them to make Swiss cheese or advantageous for them to make butter. And under Tallman's leadership, this really became a modern, diversified factory that grew from about 12.5 patrons to some places we've read over 200 patrons. Tallman ran this factory from 1932 to about 1954. During that time, he both lived here and he lived in Verona. He not only helped to expand the factory from what was really just there. Tallman was really responsible for building a butter wing of the factory so that they could separate butter from cheese. You have as that first document there the co-op's application to the, what board was that? Here, I'm going to use my notes here. The Civilian Production Administration. So this butter was doing really well during World War II. They needed to produce more butter. They needed more farmers. So they applied to the Civilian Production Administration to build that wing over there in 1948. The other big thing that Tallman did, which was very early on, is he built a grade A milk factory that was licensed by the Chicago Board of Health as a grade A milk facility. Now, before I did this, I had no idea what the difference between grade A and grade B milk was, and probably some of you guys don't look down on me, but I've learned, right? For those who didn't know, right, grade A had different standards of production and refrigeration on the farm versus grade B. And this became one of the first factories in this region to not only be able to sell grade A milk across state lines to Chicago, but really getting local farmers, as far as I could tell, to shift towards a refrigerated bulk grade A production so that milk could come in here, and again, depending on what was most advantageous for the co-op, either be turned into butter, turned into cheese, or shipped, processed and shipped directly from this building over state lines into Chicago where it could be sold as fluid milk. We found out that both that was a really important and profound moment in the co-op's history, but also that led to this building in this co-op being innovators and pushing all of their members into not only grade A milk production as it related to refrigeration, but grade A milk production as reflection of bulk milk distribution, right? And facilitating local farmers to go away from grade B can production, right? And to support their journey from that to refrigerated bulk tank milk production on their farm to refrigerated bulk tank milk distribution here. And this element of the building that we sit in is the kind of reflection of that when they built in 1962 a brand new milk truck garage. At any given time, many of you guys know Al Geiger. He was the owned the company that delivered a lot of the bulk milk here. But this was pretty early on, as far as I can tell, about getting farmers away from canned milk, grade B milk, to grade A bulk milk production. And I have the article there that says it. And Mary helped identify that, which was really wonderful. And you can read all about this amazing little co-op in Paoli that was innovating to get milk into this plant in bulk and grade A, so that the farms could ship across state lines. Now, also interesting, what happened is at that time, all of this development, one, Otto's wife was incredibly sick and died, so Otto left. But two, it seems like this plant got a little over leveraged. And in came, which is very typical of the 1950s, and in came Pabst Farms in Oconomowoc in 1955 and bought the assets of the co-op. And what I've heard from a couple farmers were really critical in paying a couple of the checks that the farmers weren't getting their money from the co-op. And so Pabst stepped in here, so we're going to take this over, and we're going to operate this a little bit differently. Pabst didn't want the cheese program, so the cheese program was gone. What Pabst wanted more than anything was the access to this grade A milk facility that these farmers had built for themselves. Because Pabst made a huge investment in dried milk for baby formula. So Pabst bought what was, at the time, one of the largest milk dryers anywhere in the United States, so that they could dry milk to send to a company in East Troy, where that company made baby formula. And the milk production and the milk supply that they had in Oconomowoc wasn't quite up to snuff. And so they bought this factory, and it gave them access to about 100 more dairy farmers. And from about 1955 to 1980, the milk was separated and pasteurized and separated back here. And they kept the butter production going. The butter production by that time was almost exclusively going to Land O'Lakes in a wholesale fashion. But as you can see, back a couple of decades, this factory was selling its own branded butter. We have one butter box, one of our great treasures, and we took that butter box and made it a mural outside. So if you go outside and look at that wall, that's the butter box from the 1930s. It's really a beautiful, wonderful piece of milk marketing and milk branding. And so that's what really Pabst wanted from this building, is the industry consolidated. And then, we knew, the milk, the crisis of the early 1980s was really what put this building out of business. And I learned the story of this building closing from a guy named Joe O'Brien. You guys maybe know Joe. He runs Roadrunner Tow Truck Company in Belleville, and his dad was a butter maker here. He grew up here. And it was really an incredible day, because I'm just here working away on just all sorts of goofy stuff. And then this, if you know Joe O'Brien, I mean, Joe is like a big guy. Everybody know him? Big, gregarious guy. And he pulls up in this tow truck, and I was like, oh, what did I do wrong? Right? And he's got his tow truck garb on and everything. And he comes in, he's like, my dad was a butter maker in this factory in the 1970s. And he just launches into these incredible stories about growing up in the factory and all the guys that he knew, what it was like to stand right here where the milk trucks were, what it was like to stand next to the pasteurizer and the homogenizer, how loud those were, all the guys that were drinking and smoking and hanging out and doing all sorts of crazy things that you could do in a factory in the 1960s and 1970s. But then he related the day of the factory's closing on February 14th, 1980, and how all the guys were. He tells the story of Earl Jansen, who's in that one article, about how Jerry knew that something was bothering Earl, and he was worried about it. And then, like a day later, he said, "We're going to have a meeting." It was Friday afternoon, and of course it was all guys, right? So all the guys were like, "Oh, it was Valentine's Day," and they were all supposed to go out to eat with their wives. And so all the guys that worked here were pissed because they were supposed to go out to eat with their wives, and they all sat down at the end of the day on Friday, and they were all let go, and all the milk contracts went to API and Oro. And that really ended this factory's century, almost century, of dairy production. And that story that I just related to you was mostly just in the heads of folks like Phil Roethlisberger, people like Mary, dozens of other people that we had conversations with. And again, more than anything, we wanted to take that story and build a collective history for the dairy farmers and the workers and the office workers that really made this factory not only a centerpiece of their lives for 100 years, but be very emblematic every step of the way, which is what I think about is cool about this building, of the transformation of Wisconsin dairy, whether it was butter or cheese, or whether it was bulk milk, or whether it was refrigerated milk, or whether it was the last addition to our factory in 1978, which was to accommodate the 46-foot trailers. This factory and its building represented like every little moment of that step, of that transition of Wisconsin dairy. From a frontier cheese factory of 7 cooperative members to a much larger corporate factory owned by Pabst to a factory that eventually went out of business in the early 1980s. Made it a lot longer than most factories did, but certainly fell to those forces of industrialization and consolidation that continue to, chew up and spit out small dairy farmers and small dairy factories today. And so for us to be able to preserve that and to celebrate it was a really important thing for me and my wife. I have a couple things for you. You have 3 documents there. The first document is about the building of the butter wing. As you guys kind of contour around here, the butter wing is over. It's in the southeast corner of the factory. That is the request to the civilian production administration to help build that because they needed so much butter. This is in this area here. It's very clear. This was the big bulk milk garage that they built in early 1960s. That second document is a reflection of. And then I have 3 of the rooms open over here, which is in the far north of the building. And that's the grade A facility. You can see when you're looking down, this is concrete, right? You can imagine the milk trucks. We poured this concrete. That's original concrete back there. Everything's a little slopey here, right? Because they had to move the water, usually into the Sugar River. But I've got some of those rooms open back there so you can see. They had to keep the grade A separate from the grade B physically, right? So actually this was grade B was over there, the grade A was over there. Welcome you to tour around. I do have a couple of opportunities and asks. One, feel free to, this is kind of all that we learned about putting this building on the National Register. Much of it exists here in this timeline, so feel free to look at that. The other thing, we really want this to be a building that lives and is part of a living history. We are currently collecting and curating stories of which are going to appear. We're just starting, but this is our Dairy Hero Wall. We're calling it the Dairy Hero Wall, and these are photos of, including I think we got your photo up here, Mary. I'm pointing at this, but like you actually go a little bit over. There's like 25 photos over there. If you have anybody who you know who is delivered milk here, worked here, family member, we'd love to have their photo up on our Dairy Hero Wall so that we can commemorate all of the cheese makers and butter makers and cheese washers and office workers and farm families that really made this building very special. And I guess the final ask is, we built this for the use of enjoyment of the public, right? Like in very much a national park kind of sense, right? Which is the National Park Service helps manage the National Register. But we also know that if you have friends or family ever coming to stay here, you have a choice of where they can stay. You have a choice of where you can take them out to eat. you have a choice of where they can come get coffee in the morning. And we hope that as you kind of think about, people out of town family members staying here, or people who you need hotel rooms for, or want to have a nice beer, we have Paps still on tap, that you guys really consider that when you come here, you're investing in the perpetuity of this building, and you're investing in the legacy and the history of dairy production in this region, which over the last couple of years, I've kind of become maniacal about, because I just think what happened here in this golden age of Wisconsin dairy, when there were literally thousands and thousands of family farms in Dane County and Greene County with these little herds of a couple dozen Holsteins, and to hear Phil's story about, well, you have 12 kids because you have 12 cows and you needed them to be milked, was like, I could die a happy man having heard that story. But to have something where we all can use and we all can celebrate that history is something that's really important to me, and has really driven the development of this place and the reuse of this place. So I think probably the best way is just to feel free. We have the rooms open, that's the Grade A milk facility. That was built in the late 1940s, early 1950s. You're in the milk truck garage here that was built in the early 1960s. Those two areas over there, that was the cheese wing. Once they had a cheese wing, was right here. And if you look real closely down on that factory floor, which we preserved, you can see where the old cheese vat sat. Big circles on the red floor. And then over to the east is the butter wing, which you have that historical document right there, where they built what was very likely Wisconsin's largest butter factory in the early 1950s, where they were producing 20,000 pounds of butter a day. We also have a little butter factory. We produce 200 pounds a day, so we joke that we've gone from the largest butter factory in the state to the smallest butter factory in the state. But we really wanted to have dairy production back in this building again. That was really important to us. We have 3 centuries of dairy production on this site. So we also, besides having an inn, cafe, restaurant, we wanted to put enough businesses on here, and like, someone will figure out something that they like, right? We have a bar, but we also have a little dairy plant. The smallest licensed dairy plant in the state, where we're making our soft serve from the Sarbacher family, who are our next door neighbors, and also making a line with Landmark Creamy of artisanal butter.
Are you up for questions, Nick?
Yeah. How long was that? Oh, that wasn't bad. That was 30 minutes. Good, that's what I wanted to do. Yeah, before you guys go explore, I've spent a lot of time talking to people. You probably know things that I don't know, actually, too, and I'm really enthusiastic to take stories maybe that you have. This is maybe not a time now, but I mean, I'm open. There's nothing more that I would like to do than to be the person that's preserving stories. All right, so you guys, are you, okay. This is a 1940s butter factory.
Okay.
So this was built under Otto Tallman's managership. What's really kind of cool here is that this platform was where the milk originally came in, and they built the platform because everything moved by gravity. So they didn't have pumps until the 1950s. So the farmers came here. This is back canned milk days. Farmers came here. Their cans came in this wall to the platform. If you go outside, you can see where the old cans, the openings were, so they could stick the cans in. The cans came in here. They washed the cans, and then they set them back out for the farmers to come get the next day. And so this was kind of where all the, couple dozen patrons at the time. And this is where they kind of the social hour, and they'd all hang out morning and afternoon. So kind of cool. We were able to save. This was the old butter cooler. We were able to save the old butter cooler door. This is where the churn sat. This is where they pack the butter. Where our kitchen is right now is where the quality testing took place. So butter came here into the churns, churn the butter, pack the butter into the butter cooler, and out the receiving area it went. If you kind of, we'll circle back around, but if you look closely, we have where the old transom was, where they would open up the cooler and they would put out the little thing and go right into the butter, the cooler trucks.
So Nick, these tiles, they look so clean. Did you
Yeah.
put these up, or are these
No,
from the butter plant?
All the tiles everything's original,
Wow.
right? So all these tiles would have likely been in a 1950s rehab. This is the original tile.
And what was this? You told me about this last week.
Oh yeah, this is where the bubbler was. So you can see where the old bubbler
Was that still there when you bought the place, or no?
No, the bubbler had been gone.
How'd you find that out? Did you find an old picture?
An old, one of the kids that used to hang out here, who's now 70s, right? So, this is the most historic section of the factory. This was 1920s. We know because this was typical of the architecture of cheese factories and butter factories at the time, having the gabled roof, which reflected their power source and their heat source, which would have been wood. This is where they would have made the Swiss cheese, and this is where they would have made the butter. And if you look kind of closely here, this would have been post moving away from wood. But you can see where the old vats sat. We uncovered all that, and we did a lot to try to save them. This floor, all the floors here are interesting that they're all sloped a little bit, right? So makes for kind of sitting challenges sometimes, but they just wanted the water to go in the Sugar River. So, but if you can imagine butter here, if they needed the milk to make the cheese here, and then kind of most everything went out and was disposed into the Sugar River. There were 31 dairy factories on the Sugar River, and most of them were on the Sugar River because it was a nice place to be able to dump waste. So they made what was called drum Swiss, and these were the really, really big wheels of Swiss that were for wholesale markets. So after the cheese was made here, it aged for between 60 to 90 days in our cheese caves, which we'll go down into, and then it was picked up by a truck, taken to Monroe, and in Monroe, that's where it would have been sold across the United States.
Nick, can I ask a question?
Yep.
What was the moment like where you found the circles on the floor? Were you there, or did someone else call you and say, Nick, I found these circles?
I mean, no one would have noticed outside of me, so that was a cool moment.
Yeah? Did you know right away what they were?
Oh, yeah, because we have the photographs. This was also another cool moment. All of this was under drywall. So we were able to pull this all up, and we discovered this old door here. When this was a factory, these were stairs, right? So you just would have stepped down stairs onto the cheese floor. So if you can imagine, the cheese, the wheels of Swiss would have been right here was where they pressed the cheese, right, into the molds. And here was the door into the cheese caves, right? And we're actually kind of halfway up, but you kind of see where it extended down. And then kind of through the mechanical rooms, this was all mechanical rooms. This was basically power source, and into the caves. I'll talk a little bit about the affinage process of Swiss cheese in a second. But this probably area was the least interesting. This was all mechanical, and all mechanical rooms. But let's go do a little cheese cave tour.
Oh, wow. Oh, thank you. Thanks. the cheese caves were just for refrigeration, just to keep them cold? Is that why they put them in caves? Or just for storage, they had to put them somewhere?
Tell the whole story.
Oh, good. Did you build the staircase, or was this here?
Yeah, we built the staircase. So for, we'll let everybody get down here. So we got a bunch of water softeners, which are new, but for previous tours, I would give, if you went through there, you could see it's one of the original flagstone foundations of the building. So if you can imagine, this is about, almost, we covered this up, but this is about where that door would have came through and the cheese would have come in. And we like the idea of saying that this still building is used for dairy. Here's our beer, but this is also where we store our ice cream base and our butter. But Swiss cheese was really pretty unique, and you can't make Swiss cheese anymore in the way that they made it historically, because you needed to have much more significant gradients of temperature than DAT cap would allow today. So would have been made in copper kettles in here, and it was basically a two-part affinage or cave process, right? This was the first part of the process in this area. This had a brine river, so basically the giant wheels of Swiss would be brined, gives them, both starts the preservation and the flavor. But this was also the warmer area of the caves, because it was closest to the heat source. So what you had to do in making Swiss cheese is every single day for the 60 to 90 days, you would take the wheels and you take them from the warmer area to the colder area, and you'd flip them. And that process is basically how you get the eyes in the Swiss cheese. Is that going from an area in like the 70s or 80s to a cool area which is more cave-like, in the mid-1950s. So we'll see some pictures of the wheels of Swiss where you'll be able to recognize this area specifically here. But basically they had two men who every day while they were doing cheese making, when the markets made sense, that they were just taking this cheese, these giant 350 to 400 pound wheels of cheese, and taking them from one area of the caves to the other area of the caves, flipping them over, and in that process also salting them, right? And that salt both preserved and flavored the cheese. This was also the town of Montrose's fallout shelter. So if you were in the town of Montrose during the Cold War and you went to school, at the school, this is where you would have come in the event of a nuclear holocaust.
You'd eat cheese while you wait for help.
And we have, if you look at our bar, we have the fallout shelter. That was from right here.
Oh, no
here.
way.
Yeah, that's where that was.
I love that. So the cinder blocks would all be from that.
Yeah,
these are all original.
This was the earlier part of the caves.
Yep.
This was later.
Okay.
So this was the cooler part. Take a look at these doors. You'll recognize these doors when you come and see, when we look at some of the photos up there. But these are all doors from the 1930s or 1940s. They would have kept this separate because this was cooler to warmer. And kind of a cool little thing is so that they could lift the cheese up and so that they can wheel the Swiss in and out a little easier. You can see these are, they have these platforms here. So this, if you look, is the same width as those cheese tanks were. And basically this was allowed the cheese makers to get in and out of here with their giant wheels of Swiss. And you had one lane there, one lane here, one lane here, and you have pictures of this whole thing being full. And it was a two-man job. That's all they. You wonder why these guys are like just so ripped, right? Two-man job every day, flipping cheese. Here. We found this highway improvement sign that was tucked away behind a wall.
Like behind drywall or something?
Behind drywall. Kind of a weird thing to tuck away behind drywall.
Just to get rid of it.
Oh, thanks. So you can see the flagstone through that little hole? Is it really obvious?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, it's very, yeah.
Cool.
So this was well,
Thanks. Oh, here we are.
what you guys just came up, that was a new egress that we built. What that originally was another exit for effluent, so there's another exit for effluent. This was where you're standing in right now. So this is a new wall. This was the receiving area for that fluid milk wing, for the grade A wing. So grade A milk came in here, grade B milk came in here when they were totally separate. And right there, this was the last addition to the plant, which was 1978, and that was to accommodate the big semis, the 46-foot milk trailers, when this factory was really cranky. So right now, we're in the fluid milk wing, so grade A, and this was built in the late 1940s, early 1950s, to accommodate the fluid milk production in the plant.
What condition did you find this part in? Was this apartments or what was this?
This was all apartments.
So like there were walls here that you had to tear down to make the thing we're walking in, or?
I mean, more, yeah, sort of more than that.
Oh.
Here's one of our, these are all photographs that we collected. There's kind of two I mean, there's so many great ones, but this is an incredible, this is Otto and Roy, who was the butter maker, making butter. And local women packed the butter. So kind of that gender division labor again. The men made the butter. The women packed the butter into the retail sections. You can see kind of the whole old historic 1950s tile. This is a really great photograph in that it shows the gabled roof in the 1930s. What's also unique is that it shows a gabled section closer to Paoli Road that would have been raised when they expanded Paoli Road. But this almost assuredly is the gabled section that still exists. What you notice behind the gabled section, which no longer exists, was the cheesemaker's residence. So both the Otto and very likely people before him would have lived on site, which is fairly typical. Tallman and his family, I think, ended up building a house in Verona in the early 1950s, late 1940s. That house is still there, and it's apparently a really nice, beautiful historic house that people talk about. But if you look closely, you see the old cheesemaker's residence, which is where they would have lived, but also where the workers who came would have like eaten lunch during the day.
How about the chimney? That's at this property?
Yes, that chimney, it would have kind of been, you would have seen it right by the flagstone,
Okay.
right in that corner there. Yeah.
Wow. Right near the mechanicals.
Yep, where the mechanicals were. This, you see where we did a little work. I wish the Tallman, let me see if I can, they're dirty, but. So the separator, the homogenizer, the pasteurizer was here. This was where the cream was. So eventually this cream, sorry, I think it's probably dirty in here. Oh, wow, look at that.
Oh, wow.
So that was the old bulkhead for the cream tank.
So this is cream on its way out to be picked up to...
This cream would have sat here until they needed it in the butter factory.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the cream wasn't sold. The cream was always made into butter.
Was this covered up when you came here? Was there
Yes,
a wall?
this was covered up.
So it was under discovery, huh?
Uh-huh.
Cool. Did you put the tile around it, or that's tile original as well?
All tiles, all original.
Wow.
The windows are new. A lot
Wow.
of custom-made windows here.
I bet.
Those are cheap.
Yeah, I'll move on.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that were not cheap.
That one's got the kitchen.
No one in the rain.
Oh, this is the fall. Oh, wow.
Wow, look at
They
that.
have Paul and furniture.
Uh-huh. Paul and Jared, good site.
They made a table.
Oh, they crushed it for us.
They made a personal table.
Oh, sure. Brent's got a bar tent here at least once a week. So this is kind of our presidential suite. Bar, kitchen, sitting area, king bed. This will be where the bride and groom stay, the weddings.
Right.
But kind of unique historically is if you look closely, we repoured this concrete, but this was the original wall. And this wall had 3 of the same bulk. This is where the milk platforms were on this side. And there were 3 of those windows, the same. And unfortunately, we didn't know about them in time. And we did all the design and we opened it up, and there were 3 of those same circular walls that we lost. But this is where the 3 milk platforms sat. And this was the bathroom, and this was a urinal. And I saved the urinal. I don't know what we're gonna do with it,
Yeah.
but the urinal is right there. And you know, the complexity of this whole thing is like everything's just a little slopey. But yeah, this is obviously the presidential. This is a suite we named after Otto. This is Tallman's
Yeah.
suite. Kind of a couple cool of the old calendars from the co-op.
Where'd you find those?
Somebody had them, donated them. What we've said is if you know anybody or have anything that is related to factory, we will take them on loan and keep them as long as you want us to. But it's kind of cool. So this would have been what, 1940s?
Yeah, 46.
46 and 49.
Yeah.
And that
So-
says Basco.
Yeah, so Paoli's never had a
Post
post office, right? So
Basco.
we've gone back and forth between being in Basco and Belleville,
Okay.
depending on when it was. This is cool because you kind of see the Paoli brand creamery butter, Swiss cheese.
Thank you. So this was the bathroom when you took it over. The urinal was still there in place, and it was
Urinal?
was it used by the?
No,
Oh,
it was locked. It was just there.
Oh, it was not an active bathroom for the.
Not an active bathroom, it was just there.
Oh,
Urinal was there, sink was there, window.
I heard from several people there were apartments here. Did they roughly correlate to these, or totally no relationship whatsoever?
No relationship.
Gotcha.
This was still a bay. So this is the milk collar suite. So right now what we're moving into is the grade A. So this whole area was built in 1962 to accommodate bulk milk hauling. So this garage had 3 bays. At any given time, there were 9 milk trucks delivering to the plant. This is what we were able to obviously save all this, but this is kind of a cool suite in the sense of saving the bay and putting or the garage doors were all still here, the original garage doors. So we turned them all into windows, and this one being one of the suites. We poured this concrete up, but this is all original concrete here.
On this side.
Yeah.
Okay.
And actually, there was a smaller original door here where the workers would have gone into. Yeah. And here is the Swiss cheese making. I was telling Jesse I have a much larger number of photographs, but that is that plant right there. And if you kind of look closely, you can sort of see, but what's kind of cool is if you here, this is Ed Yagi. Ed became one of Wisconsin's most celebrated cheesemakers. As soon as he left here, this is kind of where he was an apprentice. Blue Ribbon Award winner for Swiss Munster Brick, had his own factory near Broadhead. But if you kind of look closely, you see the doors from down in the cheese case. And basically this is what 2 men would have done, is just spend their days flipping and moving 400-pound wheels of Swiss.
Is that the guy on the left?
That's the guy on the left, is Ed. He a Verona resident.
Yeah.
Original Verona. That farmstead is right across from the river co-op. Riverside co-op.
How many people would you anticipate would be at a wedding?
Well, we have outdoors. We have multiple 100-person weddings booked.
You do?
Yep.
Like 300?
300. Yep.
Can you mention the cool tree that you found down there? Because I didn't realize that your land went so far that direction.
The part of the story that I also didn't tell is we were much more enthusiastic about preserving the land here than we were the building at first. It was very apparent that there was an old growth oak grove back here with multiple 100-year-old oak trees that you didn't need to talk to a bunch of dying farmers to realize that they were really important and profound. So one of the things that we were very excited about is to kind of do some significant ecological restoration to restore the old oak grove, of which there's a 300-year-old red oak, there's multiple couple 100-year-old bur oaks and white oaks, which interestingly, we're right on the section line. So when the surveyor, it's cool to think like that the surveyor coming through in 1836 and remarking on about our oaks in a much younger stage on the property. So obviously we kind of had to figure out how to monetize that land a little bit, and so hence coming up with both a little outdoor wedding venue, but also really cool. So why we know there were 31 cheese factories on the Sugar River is that in 1955 the DNR came through and said you can't dump your waste in the Sugar River anymore. So at that point, the co-op built a road to the top of the property, dug a big pit, and started piping the waste from the factory up to the top of the pit. And it was locally known as like the Way Lagoon. The kids still, talk about how smelly and gross it was. But it's actually kind of this cool little culturally modified landscape, and it's like a bowl. It's almost like an amphitheater if you go back there. And so we kind of have worked to preserve both that way pit and also return it to kind of an amphitheater-like opportunity for us, where we're not so much into the concerts, but like movie nights, plays. We're going to have that's another area that you will be able to rent and have outdoor parties as well. So the way pit gardens, Sugar River Flats, and then we've kind of got this 4 acres of restored oak savanna.
Did you find the pipes that they pumped? Were those still there in the ground?
No, we didn't find the pipes, but the road was really evident, and you couldn't have seen that before we did the restoration work.
Nice.
I mean, this was just pretty much all grown over when we purchased it. But you can kind of see the concept in this little map of what this will look like. And as soon as it's warm this summer or this spring, hopefully in March, we'll be able to get to it. Because we've got a 300-person wedding on May 31st, so we've got
All right.
to be ready for it. So we're really motivated to get that done.
What's that old metal door there on the side of the building for? Was that something that was cheese related?
Yeah, that's where the butter came out, right? So that's the door. That was the butter door.
Okay.
So that's where the trucks would have pulled up. They would have opened that up, and out would have come this. I think it was for most of the factory's history, 64-pound blocks of wholesale butter.
Okay.
So this was we filled this in a little bit, but this was this was the receiving area for the butter wheat. Yeah, develop a bunch of ancillary products. Or we didn't want to buy, we wanted just kind of something. So we kind of stumbled upon this whole milk premium soft serve that's, I think it's really good. It's really getting there. It's really pretty good. And what we love about it is we can take the Sarbacher milk from next door and turn it directly into a great dairy product without a lot of processing, without a lot of need to develop other products, without a lot of additional knowledge of dairy, none of which we kind of had. So that's why we chose soft serve. We originally were like, oh, let's do cheese again here, but do we really want to sit on thousands of dollars? So part of this is we can just take the milk, we can make a really good, beautiful, fresh product. We can turn it into ice cream, and people can love it.
Where does the wild rice part come from?
What you'll see on the menu, increasingly, that's not totally readily evident, is our love of foods of this place over time that are more than just the dairy period, but also kind of go further back, right? So you'll see a lot of berries and some wild game, the wild rice, the black walnuts, maple syrup. We're tapping our box elders out here. So we really kind of when we think of 7 Acre as a place, really, I think we think of it as a place that's a much deeper time kind of moment. And so thinking about a lot of the foods of this region, even before settlers and before settlement, and tying that kind of part of this into kind of our food program. So lots of maple syrup, lots of wild rice, lots of black walnuts, cranberries, blueberries, wild game, as we kind of make sense of the kind of the farmstead cookery of the period too. Do you try the wild rice ice cream? It's pretty good.
It was great.
Some people have some bad things to say about it, but I think it's great. The wild rice ice cream with the black walnut candy, it's this kind of mashup of what has been grown and produced in this place for 1,000 years, which we think is kind of
Yeah.
interesting thought. Right.
Can I ask a question, Nick? That dramatic Friday where everyone got laid off in 1980 on Valentine's Day, do you know where that happened? Was that in the office? Has anyone told you, I was there? Or did you hear from the kids
I've got that in video actually from
An interview?
Joe O'Brien Jerry O'Brien that I can send to you.
Do you know where it was in the factory?
No, I don't.
Okay.
But Jerry probably does.
He was there, huh? He was
No,
on
but
the
his
front.
dad was, and he recounts it really well.
Oh, wow.
I have that. I'll send that video.
I'd love to see it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. There's a couple people who really remember this well, and one of them is the son of the buttermaker who was here in the 60s and 70s. The buttermaker's name was Joe O'Brien. His son's name is Jerry. And I think he just tagged along to work with his dad all the time. So just has an incredible memory and is an incredible storyteller.
Wow.
Of the 24. I mean, the funny story about him is had just bought this place, and I was here working, and this tow truck, giant tow truck shows up, and this guy gets out, and he's very big and imposing. He comes in, and I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And he, kind of a little bit like Phil, when I made that phone call, just started to gush. I didn't even know the guy, and I was working. He's like, my dad, and just went through the whole story. Same thing, for an hour. And since then, I mean, he's he's in his 70s, but has been back a couple of times. We've recorded his story.
Oh, great.
So he, as far as I know, I don't know if I know everything, he has the best recollection of this factory as it operated in the 1960s and 70s, because I think he hung out here in his days here with his dad. It's where the old this is the entrance. So where that big door is, right? This is where they pushed into.
Okay.
So this was the end of the little platform into here, right? We had to dig all that up. But yeah,
Is this 1880?
This would have been 1880.
This is the original.
This is 1888, 1889, 1900. Yeah.
And did this? So that part you had to excavate. That was all dirt when you came in. Or no, that was open because it was the door going down.
This was all. The previous owners, if you look, I mean, I've been in here, but and you can stick your head in a little further.
Yeah.
Because you can see, so this was the entrance to the caves.
Okay.
Right here.
Yeah.
So you kind of see, and the previous owners had put a false floor over this,
Okay.
right? But here's,
How far do you think this goes towards the road? Because we're not super far from the road. This goes in that direction, right? It's like a square.
yes, this was part of that original. One of the parts, here's what this was. This was one of the parts of the original building that's no longer here, right?
Yeah.
This would have been something. This would have had something to do with a gabled roof, right? If you want to pop in there, I'll
Yeah, if you don't mind. Thanks.
get out. You kind of see. So right there, that's the entrance to the cheese case.
This was the entrance. Okay. What are those tubes down there?
We put those in. That's electric or.
Okay. Conduit. Look at that.
So, if you think about where we were,
Yeah.
we were about right here. And where that almost surely was this, which is no longer there.
And we were on the other side from this picture of
Yes.
that?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's gone. Right? But this is 1908. Right? So
And how much of the square foundation is left there? We saw one side of it. Do you think there's two other sides?
yeah, almost surely, but I haven't seen them.
Yeah.
But this, if you look at it and you think about it, right? This was likely, I mean, this was just bulldozed so many times.
Yeah.
But this area right here was almost surely that building,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Wow.
somehow along the way, we know that there was significant reno in 1908, 1920, you know. Right now, we're above a section that there's some stairs underneath here, some concrete stairs, later stairs.
Oh.
Right?
What was?
But right here, right, you know, so here is, right, if you can imagine, here's the caves, here's the entrance, and what you saw there was, that
Yeah.
was the exit.
What was this all like when you took it over? What was where you are right now?
False floor,
False floor. Were there walls here too, where your kitchen is, or?
no walls. Interestingly, this was 2 stories,
Uh huh.
and there's an apartment above here.
Okay.
And there was a floor right here, and this is where the Creamery Cafe was, or the Vare Cafe. This was open. The previous owners opened it. I have pictures of this all being closed
Okay.
off with that same brick. We know that this was used as a road to get back to the milk trucks at one time. There's just little pieces that you kind of think you know, but
Yeah.
you don't entirely know.
The gabled roof. Gabled means like a triangle, right?
Yep.
Is that still there above us?
Yes.
And you can see from the outside.
Yes.
Okay. I've been coming from.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, I mean, this was any cheese factory about after around World War II would have had a flat roof, right?
Okay.
So any cheese
Oh.
factory before World War II would have had a gabled roof,
And that's it right
and
there.
this reflected just the kind of the pulley system and the heating system of factories of that era.
But the gabled roof we saw in the picture with the woman in black and white is not this gable, is it?
It is.
Oh, it is exactly that gable.
But there was one in front of it that was raised when they expanded Paoli Road. And then there was there was a very significant one behind it. I mean, so take a look at this. We can go back and look at kind of the Gertrude.
Yeah.
But this gabled roof,
This one right here. That
That's-
faces Paoli Road, right?
no.
Okay, I'm switching around.
This gabled roof
Yeah.
connects to the current butter factory. This one's gone. This one is that factory right there.
The one we just looked at?
Yep.
So this is that thing we were just looking at. So we were standing
No, you were looking on the other
from
side.
this way. Okay, so we were this way looking at it from there.
Yep.
So
That's gone.
So where's Paoli Road here? This
right
way?
here.
Like
right
we're kind of standing in it?
She's right there. Right, Paoli Road is now where that was.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
And this was all blasted out. I have pictures of that from 47, where they were blasting this out to build the butter wing. Right?
Okay.
So this here is, so one of these two is that. Almost surely.
Nice.
Right? That makes sense. So this was
Yep.
this was the exterior,
Yeah.
and the original, when this was original, this was the milk intake. When it was
Yeah.
just, when it was this, and that way, right?
Yeah.
And then we also have that 19th century flagstone,
Yeah.
right? That was almost surely that 1908 photo,
Wow.
right?
So they would, if we walked straight down here and took a right, we'd be right where you and I were looking at the flagstone, right down there.